the inspections part. We're going to hit this one kind of hard because this is the one that we get the most conversation. And basically, inspections are for the purpose of conducting an inspection to evaluate the present condition of the property and its major systems. Buyers and sellers agree that whenever the term "as is" condition is used here, the term shall be deemed to mean its present existing condition without warranty except for warranty specifically implied by Kansas law or expressly set forth in the contract. Parties further agree that the inspection selected by them shall be included as terms and/or conditions of the said contract. While the inspections initial as declined have been offered and are not made part of the contract, the seller shall afford the buyer reasonable access to the property to conduct the inspections, re-inspections, inspections, or any repairs or replacements necessary. Any replacements completed by the seller and/or final walkthrough prior to closing. Seller's representative will ensure activation of utilities necessary for inspection, including water, gas, and electric service at seller's expense. Buyer will be responsible and pay for any damage to the property resulting from the inspection, and buyer and seller authorize all inspection reports to be provided in writing to all parties and all real estate licensees involved in the transaction. Buyer and seller agree that any repairs or replacements which are performed pursuant to the following provision shall be completed in a like manner. There's a lot of information right here that you guys need to be taking heed. One, inspections are paid for by the buyer. They're selected by the buyer. They're paid for by the buyer, with the exception of the termite, which is predominantly paid by the seller. The provisions within the termite inspection also indicate upfront any termites or damage created by termites is going to be remediated by the seller at seller's expense, or the contract can be canceled at the buyer's option. Okay, so that termite is separate from the rest of the world. As is a lagoon, outside septic system, or a form of wastewater treatment other than a sewer. And those become the responsibility of the seller as well. And we'll go into that in a little bit. Present existing condition without warranty except for warranty specifically implied by Kansas law. If a person has marked on a seller's disclosure that a key component of the property is not working, at the time that they complete the seller's disclosure, it is exempted from the home inspection aggregate total. So for example, if there's an attic fan and they mark that the attic fan is not working, the home inspector can point out that the attic fan is not working and what could potentially be wrong with it, but you cannot use whatever figures they come up with as part of that attic fan for the aggregate. Okay. Now, what that means is they're forthright with you, the seller, and you've already taken into consideration through the seller's disclosure the price of the home. If it is a valid issue that has to be remediated for the proper use of the home, it's kind of a different story. They can't mark that the HVAC system doesn't work and expect a person to ignore the fact that the HVAC system doesn't work in my house. It has to have heat in order to qualify for any home. There has to be heat, and that heat has to be to all rooms. So a lot of times you'll find that in the older homes where gravity heat was the only form of heat, a lot of those homes, North Topeka, like down, the heart of North Topeka, 800 block North Jackson, 700 block North Jackson, those houses that are right around Noto, a lot of those houses have the original gravity heat, and some of those houses even maintain the original boiler for the steam heat. A lot of times, because they didn't run the duct work or whatever in two-story homes, back rises. And so you're gonna see a lot of open floor grates in some of those houses on the second floor. Room, you look straight down to the, main floor. We used to have a lot of fun in my grandma's house because we'd go up there during holidays and draw money from them and make them come in and the floor and freak out the parents. But that was the heat source for the second floor of those homes. Heat rises. So it was through natural attrition of the heat that the upstairs was. Now code calls for heat vents in every room in order to function as a viable heat source. You can't go back and make an old home new again by adding ductwork. However, I have seen it come back in inspection repair requests where buyers have asked the seller to install ductwork onto the second floor in order to make the transaction come and close. People will do it on occasion, but you have to remember old homes can't be made new again. So bear that in mind when you're out looking at houses, especially older construction type houses, because they may or may not have a heat source. The other issue is with finished attics. A lot of people in the bungalows and those kinds of things have finished the attic space for additional living space. A lot of times you'll find a master bedroom up there. Make sure there's a heat source or a heat vent. Look at the floor, look at the walls. See if there's a heat vent, because if there's not, it could come up to haunt you later.
Yeah, I was thinking about this was, we had one with one like this homes, and it was all a finished area up there. It wasn't even attic, it was just a bungalow. There was no heat source.
Right. And that really cannot be considered living square footage because there's no viable heat source. And a plug-in space heater does not count. That's a fire hazard. Okay. So different things that you need to be aware of. The other thing in here that's important to understand is that it says that all utilities will be turned on at seller's expense prior to the inspections and appraisals. 95% of the time, that is going to be a true statement. Okay. However, if you have a foreclosure that you're purchasing with your buyer, the seller is not going to pay to restore utilities. A lot of times utilities can't even be restored in those homes because an electric meter may have been pulled, the water meter may have been pulled, the gas has been shut off, those kinds of things. If it is required for an appraisal or an inspection, the buyer is going to have to pay for that turn on. The city has been generous in the past, and if it is a situation such as an appraisal or an inspection, a lot of times they'll turn the water on for a duration of 1 or 2 days just to get through the inspection period. They understand that, and gas and electric isn't necessarily as forgiving. Just make sure that if you ever have to have water turned on in a property, when you do an inspection or an appraisal, somebody A is going to have to be there when the water gets turned on, because the city will not take responsibility for any damage created by the water. Do yourself a huge favor on the front end. Go around the house before the water company gets there. They're going to call you about 15 minutes before they'll get there to meet you there. Make sure you walk around the house and shut off all the valves. There's nothing more unnerving than to be in a house when they turn the water on and you hear water hit the floor. And I'm speaking from experience, not a what if. Okay? And the room that it happened to me on was a finished laundry room on the main floor. And the water was left on. It was a HUD property. We knew they couldn't. The HUD on a HUD foreclosure, you need to go look at the PCR, which is the property condition report that is put together by a third-party maintenance crew. And they are going to have tested the electric. They're going to And if there's no electricity on at the house, they'll use a generator. Water, they will tell you whether or not they're able to hold water pressure in the water pipes. And actually what they do is they use air and supposedly shut off all the valves to verify that the water will hold, right? They don't go through and make sure the valves are shut off. I can tell you I've had several head properties where say water system could not hold 20 pounds of PSI for a suspended duration. It's usually because a valve has been left open somewhere, not necessarily because a pipe is broke. In that particular case where the water came flying out of the house, it wasn't so much that I went around and didn't check the faucets, but there was a faucet with the backward turn. And that is what caused my issue. I had turned it to the off position, I thought. In reality, I turned it all the way on because it was a reverse threaded hydrant. Anyway, long story short, just make sure that you do your due diligence. If the home is vacant and the seller has to turn on utilities, then it's their responsibility to be there. Just always remember, if damage occurs during a home inspection, it's the responsibility of the buyer because it's the buyer's people who are in the house. Now, typically, inspection companies do have insurance against stuff like that, but we've had inspectors go through roofs, or not roofs, but ceilings, where they thought they were walking on a ceiling joist, and in fact, they stepped onto sheetrock. Sheetrock isn't gonna hold a 200-pound person, and you're gonna come right through it, and it's happened. And the inspectors did have to go back and repair, but it causes such an inconvenience because now you have ceiling damage and you've got repair work and you've got patching and all that kind of stuff. Don't be that agent. Make sure that you have trusted professionals. I will tell you that before the Senate right now in Washington, and they are lobbying really, really hard to make inspectors accountable. And they're going to look at requiring licensure and bonding for all inspectors to ensure that they should legitimately be in a home, which I am not 100% opposed to. I understand that there are some people who can do that job that don't have a physical license to do it, previous builders or whatever. I'm not comfortable that I would want them in my home as a seller. And I don't think a lot of sellers are comfortable with that either. So that is being taken up in the Senate this session. So know that it could be coming, that it's a requirement. Yeah.
Quick question, you may have covered it before I stepped in. If the home has been winterized in the middle of January, there's no water, they bleed the pipes and all that, you have to turn it on for an inspection, is it then the inspector's responsibility to bleed the pipes again?
Yeah. On a foreclosure, that kind of situation, the third-party management company will be responsible to come back in and re-winterize the home after the inspection.
Okay.
It's the seller's asset, whether it's a HUD property or foreclosure property. It's their responsibility to ensure it's winterized. We will pay to unwinterize it, and we will pay to have the utilities turned on as a buyer, but we're not going to re-winterize it for them. And typically, they will bring their management company out to do it. And the outlines of inspections with foreclosures are outlined in a document that you'll get from the foreclosure company at the time that you do it. So if you haven't done one, you will get instruction. Final walkthroughs. Be aware that every client has the opportunity and the right to do a final walkthrough of the property. A lot of times sellers are like, I don't want it in here, I'm packing, I'm moving, etc. They need to go in to verify that the work that the house that they're buying is what it is when it leaves. Because at that point in time, you need to make sure that when they've moved furniture out and those types of things, that didn't damage walls or create anything. The The other thing that's really important during the walkthrough is you're gonna find out, it's disheartening to some, but I have seen houses where once they move the furniture, they made it look really pretty to get it for sale and they quote unquote paid it. You would be startled to know how many paint around headboards, paint around dressers, and that kind of stuff. The paint all looks really good, it's all really crisp. Then they go and move their furniture and they, a lot of times have forgotten they didn't paint that stuff. That's when you're gonna pick that up, is in that final walkthrough. And it really does need to be resolved before you close. So whether they provide you money for paint, whether they have somebody come in and finish painting or whatever, that's what you're gonna do. Also, if I have a home, for example, there are standard nail holes that are gonna be in every wall, typically centered over the couch, centered over the TV, whatever. If I look at artwork in a home and it looks like it's gonna reasonably be placed for somebody, I don't require or ask that the buyer remove all nails, patch, fix the walls or whatever, unless they're taking something big off the wall. Sometimes, even though the contract says anything bolted, screwed, or glued, or otherwise permanently affixed to the property is in there, you are going to run into situations where sometimes, and you find this more with antique type shelving and furniture that's really heavy, it's been bolted to a wall. I don't expect a seller to leave something their grandfather made on the wall because it's bolted or screwed. I do expect this listing agent to be honest with me up front and tell me that it's bolted, but that the seller will ensure that those walls are repaired. I have, on occasion, when I've noticed an excessive amount of artwork on walls, heavy artwork on walls, that the seller remove all nails, screws, bolts, and repair the walls. Some people, and we've all seen it, and we all know it. There are some people where artwork is their world, and I have been in houses where literally almost every inch of a wall space has been covered by a picture of some type. Big, small, they randomly put them to make. That's a nightmare for a buyer to go in, because that wall basically is gonna have to be rebuilt by the time it's all said and done, right? So if I notice that in a house, I will put in the contract, in the offer, that the seller will remove all wall hangings and repair the walls accordingly. That seller expense prior to place. So there are ways to work around it. You just don't always want your seller or buyer to go into a house and be like, I can't even move in until I paint this house because of all the nail holes. Be cognizant of that, because that is going to be a reality in your world at some point.
And if you notice, like I went into a house recently where you could obviously tell they painted around a big screen TV that was mounted to the wall. It's like, just put it in the provisions that this will be repainted by closing.
And the other thing is, TV wall mounts have become a huge issue on items to be left in the contract. It specifically states all TV wall mounts will be left with the property. Some of the older TVs have a specific wall mount. You can't use a generic wall mount. If you have a seller who has that situation, tell them up front, you can't take the mount. If the mount needs to go, take it off the wall mount. Fix the wall, let them see what they're gonna get. Because what I will tell you is, as a broker, that is the one call that irritates me a lot, is buyer's agents get into houses, the seller's taking the wall mount, there's 6 holes in the wall where bolts have been placed, and they want it remediated. Well, they do need it remediated, And then I have to call the other broker and get them involved and say, your seller needs to take care of this. Mount was supposed to stay, either bring the mount back, have it mounted back professionally, or have them repair the wall. But there's always a workable solution.
Yeah,
They may not like it, but there's always a workable solution.
TV mounts and drapes are the two biggest ones that I get.
Drapes is the other one. Please, if your client wants their curtains because it matches their bedspread, or they want their curtains in the living room, I have a real issue with that because your window sizes and patterns are not going to match in the next house, typically. So you say you want your curtains, and that's great. Take them down before they're ever seen. You know, when you go into houses and all you see is curtain rods and no curtains, the agent did the right thing. They told their client, take the curtains down if you're going to keep them, but leave the hardware because it stays with the property. And we all are seeing that, and you see it more and more, specifically in master bedrooms. You'll see windows naked, but the hardware there, it's because those curtains match the bedspread. Okay.
So with our contracts that Patrick writes up in the personal property, we just put all existing window treatments stay with the home and all PV mounts stay with the home. So that way, if somebody wants something, they haven't taken it down, at least they'll address it before the.
Right, and that is the old school way of writing a personal property agreement. I'm still old school. I still do it as well. Even though the contract specifically states in it that all window treatments, curtain rods, et cetera, now in place stay with the home. Double down yourself and put it, and I do that. I will put in the person, you know, I'm a huge proponent of it. Every contract should have a personal property amendment. Every single contract, unless there is absolutely nothing to stay. Okay. It has to be on a separate document. It cannot be on section 19 unless it is a cash offer. On a cash offer, anything and everything can go on that contract because the bank is not involved. If there is a lender involved, that personal property addendum has got to be on a separate piece of paper. It never goes to the bank. It is not a part of the contract. It specifically states in there that the buyer is getting that property through no warranty of the seller at all. And it is to be deemed as abandoned property of the seller to the buyer. So it's not warranted, it's not guaranteed, it's just left. It could be brand new, it could be 40 years old, but it is what it is. But Joe's absolutely correct. In my mind, the best thing to do is to put, you know, 1, comma, all window treatments and bindings currently in home. 2, all appliances currently in home, and I identify them, including stove, refrigerator, microwave, dishwasher, washer and dryer, whatever is going to, it gets a name on a piece of paper for me. Because what I will tell you at that point, there's zero question in anybody's mind. Okay.
They can't come back and say, well, it wasn't on the seller's disclosure, or wasn't here, wasn't there.
Right.
It's just listed out.
Seller's disclosure, and what I will tell you is seller's disclosures and the information that is entered into the features of the home. A lot of agents assume, and this is a bad assumption. I can't tell you how bad this assumption is. First of all, sellers are filling out the seller's disclosure. You're not as agents. Yes, it specifically states, is it working, not working, or not included. Sellers read that as stove working, refrigerator working, because in their mind, it's there. There isn't not one, so none doesn't on our knowledge that they know what they're doing. The other thing is the features and benefits of a home on Paragon. And it asks electric stove, gas stove, vent hood, etc. Those are features of the home. A lot of times buyers want to know, is the stove electric or is it gas? They may prefer a gas stove over an electric stove. Those people are actually going to ask if they can pull the stove out to see if there's an existing gas line. I always ask my sellers when they're filling out a seller's disclosure or whatever, you have an electric stove, are you aware if there's a gas line back there for the eventual use of a gas stove? Older houses are almost always going to have a gas line and an electrical outlet. New construction, you're going to be hard pressed to find a gas line installed, which is great, except for someone like me who doesn't want an electric stove. I'm one of those people that when I turn the burner off, I want to know it's off and it's not going to cook for 20 more minutes when it cools down. I'm not that way. I either want to flame or I don't want to flame. And so gas is my preferred method. If I was going to look at a house, I would want to know, is there a gas line there or is there not a gas line there? Because if there's not a gas line there, I'm going to be in the basement looking up to see if that area is finished or unfinished and how much money is it going to cost me to put in a gas line. And I'm going to take that into consideration when I write an offer for a house. Because I'm making that house benefit me, not them. Does that make sense? So you need to be aware of those kinds of things. And that's when you do it. The buyer agrees to accept the property in its as-is condition without any inspections. Make sure your buyer understands if they initial there, there's no coming back. You have admitted and declared up front, you're not doing anything. You're buying it as is. Now, if you have a property that says in Paragon that the home is being sold as is with no repairs, and you put an inspection on the contract, and you go and you have that inspection done, and it comes back and it's got $20,000 worth of HVAC repair, the minute you put the contract on the contract, or the inspection on the contract, you now nullify it as is. The seller is now allowing you to come in with an inspection. Okay, especially if a lender is involved. If you do inspections and it comes back and the sewer's bad, or the HVAC is bad, or there's something that comes back that is going to prevent that home from qualifying for a loan, I can guarantee you the underwriters are going to catch it and they're not going to close that loan. So if you're buying an as-is property and you put inspections on it, you kind of avoided the as-is. Your other agent's going to come back and tell you, we are buying it as-is, but for informational purposes only. Yeah, I get it. But then when something major comes back and you go back and you say, well, we did a sewer cam and it's going to be $4,700. We can't buy the house without help from the seller. Well, the seller's selling it as is, but you let me do the inspection. Now the bank won't close it. The seller's more than likely going to have to participate, or you're going to kill the deal. One of the two.
I recently had one where we bought it as is, but it had a septic that we wanted to still have inspected. We had to clarify in the provisions that the buyer would have any repairs done necessary to close the loan prior to closing at their expense.
Smart listing agent. They identified that yes, it was. They identified that yes, they were letting you do it, but more so they said, we're going to let you do it, but if anything found, it's the buyer's expense, and they've agreed to it. Okay. Real estate is really simple in my mind's eye when you answer the W questions and how. Where, when, why, how. Where is the inspection? When is the inspection? Why are we having the inspection? And how are we gonna resolve the inspection? When you can answer all those questions, then you will be able to succeed with the company. But what, when, where, why? Are very important questions in this. And in the purpose of writing amendments, that's what I'm going to look at, what I'm going to look for. Is the inspector, what is the problem? When is the repairs gonna be made? Where are the repairs being made? And how and who is paying for those repairs? And that should contain the answers to all of those questions. Identify those problems.
You'd be proud to know it was another KW agent.
Well, good, they listen to me.
To be honest with you, I'm the one that suggested the verbiage, because he wasn't gonna make us do
Not been good. It's not been bad. So,
Hi,
Joe, it is now 11 o'clock.
I know.
24 minutes.
I'm just putting my stuff in here.
What's for lunch if we stay? Huh? No.
that.
Well, I guess you might have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 people anyway.
I got the agenda.
Oh. All right, so let's go through these really quick, but if your buyer says they're doing it as is, that means as is. And we're not gonna talk about any inspections if it's marked as is. You're gonna do it there, you're waiving. You need the initial here indicating that nothing was picked. You're gonna leave that blank because it doesn't apply.
Would you leave it blank or put it doesn't apply?
You can put NA or doesn't apply.
If you leave it blank, it's 1%, right?
Yeah, but you aren't marking any of the inspections, so there's no inspections to go with that. So that aggregate, this aggregate right here is only for these inspections. This doesn't spill over to any of the rest of 12.
So question on as is, if you're getting a mortgage, which is going to almost surely require the termite inspection, you cannot have property as is, correct?
Correct. If you have lender required inspections, then you're gonna have to follow your lender. Now, typically, in a lender situation, if you're buying conventional, they're not gonna require it. That's the only time that they will say, okay, we're not gonna do it. But if the lender comes back and says, we're requiring a termite, then you need to go back to the listing agent and say, lender's requiring a termite on this property. We'll pay for the termite inspection as the buyer, but any remediation needs to be looked at by the seller. Have that conversation. Okay. All right,
So I'm sorry, this is kind of a dumb question, I guess, but
there's no such thing.
I was under the impression that pretty much any mortgage required a termite, you're saying conventional.
Depends on the lender. It also depends on how much they're putting down, whether it's 3, 5, 10, or 20. 20% down conventional ones pretty much don't require anything, other than you to bring a check at closing for 20%.
Let them typically say up front whether they need inspections or not, or is that something that we need to call and specifically ask?
I would call whoever your lender is and say, hey, the buyer's getting ready to write an offer, but wanting to sell it as is. Are we going to be able to obtain a loan with an as-is purchase? And they will say, well, the underwriter is going to require a termite, or the underwriter is going to require X. And then, have that conversation with them before. It's one of those that once you have the conversation with them a few times, it's going to readily be.
So in that, I mean, they didn't buy the house as is, but I'm working with, on a transaction right now where the lender has required a foundation inspection, actually taking place today, because it was a manufactured home, and they want to ensure that it has not been moved since it's been put on the foundation.
Right, and I will tell you, manufactured homes, whether it be manufactured or modular,
Modular, I should say.
well, and we'll go over that in just a second, because that's a very key point. If you have a manufactured or modular home and it's on a foundation, every lender is going to require that it be looked at. Now, I can tell you that I sold one a year ago, maybe, well, it was 2 years ago probably, in Grand Oaks. And I know those are all mobile manufactured homes. They're made by Champion Mobile Homes. With the exception of the site built that they're making. The original subdivision was all double wide manufactured homes. They are not modulars. If somebody tries to tell you it's a modular home, it is not. It is a manufactured home. And the way that you tell the difference between a manufactured home and a modular home is you go to the basement and you look up. And if you see any metal stringers or axles, you're in a manufactured home. You are not in a modular home. A modular home, when you look up, looks like traditional floor trusses. And it's got fiberboard flooring as opposed to plywood. That's a manufactured or modular home. Okay. Big difference. Manufactured homes, specifically over there, when those were first put in there, it was an FHA housing community. Well, then FHA made a flat blanket statement saying we're not loaning on manufactured homes anymore. And you had an entire neighborhood that qualified FHA that now is manufactured homes. And those people got stuck. There's been a lot of foreclosures in there because they can't sell it. Now, FHA has released their hold against manufactured homes, and they will, but the hoops that you have to jump through are extreme in some situations. The things that you have to remember when you're dealing with a manufactured or even a modular home, they are component built homes. And there's some modulars that are 3 or 4 cubes that are put together. You have to know what you're dealing with because you have to have a plate, and it's not inside, it's outside. And there's a plate on the front and there is a plate on the back. And they typically are to the lower right of the door. Typically, not always. But when you walk up to a manufactured home, you've got your front door, and to the right of the front door on the siding, you're going to see a metal plate that's about 2 inches by 4 inches. That plate is going to have a serial number, and the front is going to say A, typically. Then you're going to go to the back, and by the back door, there should be that same plate, and it's going to have the serial number and typically a B. That means that no, that's inside, that's not the plate. That front half and the back half are a true matched unit. That is one home. Now, in situations, and Grand Oaks is a huge, in that storm that we had that moved through here in 2011, it did a lot of siding damage and a lot of roof damage to a lot of properties. Those got hit extremely hard. The people that came in and replaced the siding on those structures, because there was a huge, got to have siding replaced, just ripped the siding off the back of the houses, not knowing the importance of those plates. And now there's a lot of manufactured homes out there that don't have plates. You can't sell it without the plate. There is a process that you have to go through HUD to get a new plate. You don't unit and the back unit are together as one unit. And it costs you about $150 to get that plate. Now, it was no fault of the owners of those homes. They didn't know. The siding companies didn't know. But it has created a big issue for agents because in title searches, that's gonna come up. Okay, so just know that you're gonna have to have those plates at some point. It will come up to haunt you. No, I'm not saying that. Be careful. Just know that when you're going into that neighborhood specifically, do your due diligence on the front end and look for those plates. Because if your client wants that house and the plates aren't there, you need to be on the phone to the listing agent immediately and say, you know, we're interested in writing an offer. However, I can't find a plate on the back of this house. Have you gone through the steps to make sure that it's HUD certified and can be sold? Listing agent's gonna say, I don't know what you're talking about. You're gonna say, go talk to your broker or an experienced agent in your office. Because everyone knows. Now, y'all know now, but it has to be there. Okay.
And real quick, going back to the termite that Joe, right?
Joe, yeah.
Joe was talking about. I've had, like Summer said, you may not be able to get a hold of the lender on a Sunday afternoon if they're presenting offers. So I'll do as is, put in the termite and then the provisions, but you know, termite inspection may be waived with lender approval by Monday noon or whatever.
Okay.
So that way they know that I'm just putting it in case I have to do it by the lender, but I'm not 100% sure if they're gonna require it or not.
And then also, for weird reasons, all my loans, VA loans, I'm trying to do right now. VA does not allow the buyer to pay for the permit, correct?
I've never heard of that.
I've never heard of that either. They won't let a buyer pay for a transaction fee. If you're confusing that. There are some fees that a lender will not allow a buyer to pay. I honestly would have to check on that, Joe, because I don't know. And it could be lender specific.
Okay.
And if you're doing like USAA or maybe Federal Credit Union, some of those lenders, Veterans United. I'm an agent for Freedom Eagle, and I know that we did it because I sold one in Lawrence, and in Lawrence, the buyer pays for all inspections. And I should turn my on that.
The reason I bring this up is we just did one, I'm under contract for a home in Oxy. Yeah, it's listed on Lawrence, but done through a Kansas City agent, so we've got a mishmash of things. And this is,
Make sure you use one contract all the way through, whether it's KCRAR or Lawrence.
but it specifically talks here about it doesn't expressly say that they can't pay the termite, that's what they're talking about.
And who shared that? Who told you that?
Well, I've heard that before on that particular issue, that VA loans don't allow.
VA bars don't allow to take an inspection on home purchase, all of the 9 states, Alabama, Arkansas, Arizona, California, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Oklahoma. Something that they're not allowed to pay for it. They're not allowed to pay for the termite. Someone has to, it says on here, someone has to, someone's supposed to, but it's not supposed to be provided, and either agent can or the seller can, but not the buyer, so, or him, some person.
Good to know. I always put on the seller.
So what? Yeah, I know that they cannot pay. Um,
The transaction.
Yeah, transaction fee. Now, on the transaction fee, and I had this question from an agent this weekend. First of all, it's my choice to do this, not anybody else's choice. But when I'm dealing with a vet, I don't ever charge them a transaction fee. You can, if you so choose. It cannot go through the lending process. They would have to write a separate check to Keller Williams to cover your transaction fee. And that becomes part of the money that goes through Tammy. My feeling is if you can't live without one transaction fee, to thank a vet, then maybe. Now, Tammy is on me constantly because I waive my transaction fee a lot. And it's my choice, it's my money, I choose not to do it, depending upon the situation. But if I have a buyer client that's bought from me 2 or 3 times in a year, I'm not gonna charge them a transaction fee for every transaction. If I have somebody who's buying and selling, depending upon the situation, I may or may not charge them 2 transaction fees. Now, I know that I'm leaving money on the table because we can charge a transaction fee on every transaction, and that's cool. And I am not begrudging you one way or the other, what your choice is. And like the agent that I talked to this weekend, if they want to charge a transaction fee, they can. And there is a process in place to ensure that that does happen. But at that point, is the transaction fee that important to make them break out a checkbook and write a check to Keller Williams on your behalf? It's a choice you have to make. It's there, it's available to you. It is what it is. Those of you who work on a team, you know, your team leader may tell you, if you don't charge a transaction fee, I'm taking it out of your side. That's what Remax used to do. Transaction fee was required on every transaction, and if you didn't collect it, you paid it. So, and I still didn't charge the transaction fee because it was a non-allowable charge. Non-allowable to me, it's non-allowable. I'm not gonna go behind the books and say, well, you owe me personally. It's just not something I want to do. But you can do what you want.
So the rumors are not true, we do have a market.
Yeah, I know. Gosh, I hate it.
We won't go into it.
I'm getting disclosed.
It's online now, so you record it's free. Alec, you're here, right?
You know, Alec heard everything I said, and he's recording.
I hear you. I hear you.
Yes, gotta love us some Alec. Yeah, Alec has no problem calling me out in his class. He does it frequently. I love it. Sometimes I do things on purpose, just to keep listening. Wood destroying insect infestation inspection. Again, anything you guys have got to understand this, and there are seasoned agents that I deal with on this as well. The aggregate for this right here is only for this right here. Well, that it only pertains to these inspections. Got it? Wood destroying insect infestation report. It specifically states that the listing company, and mind you again, every inspection technically needs to be ordered by the listing agent or the listing agent's office. If you have a buyer, you can tell the listing agent, I'd like to order the inspection so I can work around my buyer's schedule if you don't mind. Some agents are gonna come back and say, it's not your job, it's my job. And they will take care of it, and they will say, when is a good time for your client to do a home review? Don't think that the listing agent is trying to take your job, because they're not. It is their job. It is their company's job to ensure that all inspections are done. And actually, it goes back I'll have to go back, but it talks about the listing company being the one to do it. So, wood destroying and insect infestation. Listing company is authorized to obtain by X date. Make sure your date's realistic. And who, buyer or seller, agrees to pay for wood destroying insect infestation inspection of the subject property by the name of the company. I'm not going to tell you who to use. There's lots of companies out there. What I would say is do your due diligence to try to make sure that you use a company that offers a warranty. State licensed pest control company of buyer's choice, and at a cost not to exceed X dollars. The dollars that are put into these contracts, you guys need to understand, are static. So if you put $100 here and you say that the seller is going to pay for it, and the bill comes in for 125, you have $25 that cannot be charged to the seller and is going to fall to the buyer. Make sure the numbers that you put for the dollar amounts are going to cover the cost of the inspection, or you're hanging your buyer out to dry.
Better to put too much than,
Right. It's 125, right, 150. Because the other thing is and you guys all got your price list increase from Home Team and everything, right? Okay. Make sure that you're aware of those price changes, because it's important for the purpose of the contract. Okay, so obtained by whatever date, who's gonna pay for it, what the name of the company is, and how much you're covering for. Okay. A written report from said company shall be furnished showing the main structure and any attachments thereto, and detached garage, should there be to be free of visible evidence of wood infestation. If evidence of wood infestation is present, the buyer may cancel the contract unless the seller agrees to pay for the treatment of the infestation by a licensed pest control company. And if any structural damage has been caused by the infestation, the buyer may cancel the contract unless the seller agrees to repair said damage. Very cut and dry. You order it, somebody pays for it. If they're there, the seller pays to remediate. Period. End of story. No discussion. All right, it's 11 o'clock. We're getting bumped. Security First is doing their Title 101. Alec, if you have not been through a title class, I would urge you to stay on